topic is kind of broad. The topic is how to talk to teens about Israel and about the conflict. And the place where I took it to is looking at the generational divide, looking at the difference between teens today, Jewish teens today, and where we might have been as teens, why those differences exist, and how to sort of bridge that divide. And I don't want this to be like me talking either, meaning this should be a conversation because you all have as much to say about this as I do. You're actually there. But for me, this is really something I've been thinking about and reading about and learning about for a while, because way before this happened, the numbers were in terms of the difference between young American Jews and older American Jews and their relationship to Israel and their affinity for Israel, even their caring about Israel. And that's a lot of that is coming to the fore right now. And maybe at the end, I'll talk about why I think this is really an existential issue for Israel. Hold on, let me share my screen. One sec. Okay. We can also talk about mental health and other things. That's also a possibility. And there's a lot more to talk about. The issue is so much broader. Your screen sharing is paused. Why? Sorry, one second. Let me reshare it. Okay. The issue is incredibly broad. As Jennifer and I were just discussing, there's a lot to talk about. There's what students are facing that are pro-Israel and teens are facing in terms of anti-Semitism there and how scary it is. And maybe we'll get to that some, but really what I want to focus on, what I said, is this divide that we're seeing. So these images should look familiar to anyone who's following the news lately. You have sort of on the extreme, I'd say on the left, or I'm not saying on the left, I'm saying on the left of your screen, you have Jews that are making very provocative statements about Israel, things that maybe we're not used to hearing, and showing really either not supporting Israel, not caring about Israel, or supporting the Palestinians in this conflict. And then on the right, you have what looks like a rally happening, and that thankfully is happening as well. If we dig into the numbers a little bit, now these are numbers of the population overall, like the US population. What's critical here is the date, right? This is October 21st through the 24th. That's when the polling occurred. So that means, right, it happened, the big attack was on October 7th. This would have been where the ground war is already beginning, but hasn't like fully intensified yet. And hold on one second. Sorry, one second. I'm running out of battery here for some reason. Sorry, I'm just going to change my charger. I'm going to duck out. Okay. So if we look at the overall numbers in terms of US population, you can see that overall, as of October 21st to 24th, there was support for Israel at 41%, right? And Palestinians at 13%. And then you can see the breakdown by who they voted for, meaning for Biden or for Trump. That's on the right. What's interesting to me here is the numbers when you get down to age 18 through 29. And when we're talking about teens, we're talking really about, let's include college age students maybe in terms of teens, even though they're really adults or young adults, but we're talking about an age range that's even below that. So you can assume that the numbers are potentially even worse when it comes to teens. So here you have a majority of teens, a majority of 18 to 29-year-olds in the United States support the Palestinians over Israel. And then the numbers get better as you get into 30 through 44. And then they go further up until you get to above 65, where you're at really broad support for Israel. Now, I wanted to give you some numbers for Jewish Americans, but actually they're very hard to come by. There's not great polling on this issue. There's not really recent polling on this issue, and there aren't tremendous sample sizes. So I have numbers that I could throw out at you about, 20% of American Jews think that Israel is committing genocide or something like that. There's not real clarity, to me at least, as to how real they are. But the working assumption is that these numbers, at least the trend, holds true for American Jews as well, meaning younger American Jews support Israel significantly less than their older Americans. Now, let's talk about the why a little bit. And then, I'd love this to be a conversation. I think it's important for us to also sort of give each other ideas, right, of how you talk to people who disagree with you within your own community about something that's, at least for me, of critical importance and such an important part of my identity. The first thing I would say is that teens today have experienced Israel in a different way than older people have, right? Depending on the generation. But Israel was an underdog, meaning was it portrayed as an underdog and often was an underdog, whereas today it's perceived as a regional superpower. Israel was often perceived as under threat and was under threat existentially, and today is seen as the aggressor. Not only seen, but they've experienced this in real time, meaning if you take like the news media at its word, Israel is presented as the aggressor. Israel was, for us, always viewed as a safe haven for Jews in need, where Jews could come from anywhere, and Israel would be there as their national homeland. Whereas now it just seems to many teams like it's just a dangerous place, right? They just read it in the news that it's horrible here, and they don't have much to do with it, and they don't really see so much of that ingathering of the exiles, even though it is happening, of course, right? Jews are coming from all over the place, from war-torn Ukraine, from Ethiopia, from elsewhere, but they're seeing it less and less. In the US itself, Israel had pretty broad bipartisan support for all kinds of reasons in the past, whereas recently there's that split, right? There is an element of the Democratic Party, an element of the left that is not pro-Israel necessarily. And in the short term, in the near past period, when President Trump was in charge, Israel became viewed as sort of a Trump issue by some, meaning President Trump, depending how you look at it, right? Meaning he had some big moves, right, that he did in the Middle East that he presented as pro-Israel, and many perceive as pro-Israel. And anything that Trump did was considered bad by people on the left. And so Israel was sort of put in that basket of Trumpian type moves, like building a wall, things that some people could not wrap their head around or agree to. Finally, in my lifetime and your lifetimes, we've seen in Israel really broad governments, right? There was the Rabin government, there was the Olmert government, going back, there's all kinds of socialist governments, whereas over the past 20-something years, it's primarily skewed right, almost exclusively. So for a young Jewish person who's looking at the state of Israel and looking to find affinity with it, there's an obstacle there in that governmental policies in Israel often skewed right. Finally, I put these words in memory versus history, because Israel is very much tied up with being an event that occurred post-Holocaust and is inextricably tied to the Holocaust. I think people overstate it on some level, saying that's why we have a state of Israel, meaning it's just as some sort of some sort of redress of the Holocaust. That's not it. That's not our tie to the state of Israel and the land. But there's no question that support for Israel was heightened because of what happened in the Holocaust, not only among the general population, but among Jews as well, right? If you look at the Reform movement, for instance, it was not Zionistic in the beginning, and then things shifted dramatically. But the Holocaust has receded, right? The Holocaust for me and for many, and I think for you, it was almost memory, right? We're talking to people who were Holocaust survivors. We have personal family connections that are not that far away. Whereas for the younger generation, it has turned not into something they don't care about, but into something that's more that's just more theoretical, right? It's almost like talking about the Civil War, and that'll become only more so as we go further in time, unfortunately. So let's go on to a couple more issues. So that's one, I think, and that is where Israel is in the world, the place that it is in the world in their lifetime, the way Israel has been experienced by them. The second thing is the shifting lens of how young people see the world generally. This is, of course, a complete generalization, right? But there's no question that there is an increased emphasis in the US, particularly over the past 3 years, 4 years, on these issues of social justice. For many young Americans, the most important and heightened period of their lives was during that lockdown, during the Black Lives Matter movement, which they considered to be a racial reckoning, where everything had to be reconsidered. All of their parents' biases had to be questioned. It's something that it's hard to understand. I think it's hard to understand the impact of it on young people who were at those rallies, who experienced it, who themselves began to question everything, from, if they perceive themselves as being white, to being maybe proud of their heritage or proud of their country, to feeling a sense of guilt or a sense of inherent racism. And all of that plays into this issue as well, as we're going to see, because Israel, for many young people, is lumped into this issue of a racial conflict, which, I don't know, were you trying to say something, Marcy? I just saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, what percentage of the young people you think like look at things this way? Is it like 80%, 50%, 20? I was just kind of curious.
I don't have those numbers. It's a great
Okay.
question. It's a great question. I would say on college campuses, it's pretty high. And it's sort of still the orthodoxy where if you want to present a different opinion or a different way of looking at things, you're sort of not in the norm, I would say. Beyond, in terms of meaning younger teens, I don't know exactly where they are, but I know that they experienced this, and it wasn't that long ago. And that all ties into this idea of intersectionality, where you look at a person and you look at the different aspects of their makeup, right? And that is the determinant, rather than the individual. That is the determinant as to whether they are, subject to oppression, subject to discrimination, whether they are deserving of redress, deserving of a reconsideration of everything. And if you take all this into play and you, in a very simplistic way, present Israel as a white colonialist enterprise that is basically not supposed to even be there, but finds itself in the Middle East among a native population that is brown, right? It's not hard to make the connection if your brain is already hardwired that this is the way you look at the world. Again, any comments you guys have would be great. Anything, just let me know.
No, it's interesting how you're sort of summarizing it. I didn't necessarily draw those aspects to it, but it's interesting how you're laying it out.
Okay. Thank you.
And Benji, you think this is like moved to like high schools and middle schools also?
I do, but it's not uniform. Meaning there are, America is a very big place, right? I would say in larger cities it is, because it's sort of in the education system. In rural areas, it's less so. And this isn't a judgment about like teaching that. I'm just saying, I do think there's a significant percentage of young people that really view the world through these lenses, because it's become sort of the orthodox approach. Now, whether there's going to be a shift and a backlash against it, there might be. I don't know, but that's sort of where these kids are finding themselves now in the culture in terms of the education often that they're getting.
And have the parents changed, or this is more like the teachers at school?
I think it really depends. I think a lot of
Depends.
parents gave lip service to it at one point.
Right.
I mean, like they kind of had to, and a lot of parents changed. Yeah, a lot of parents changed the way they look. And I don't want to, again, I don't want to I'm not here to minimize the existence of, let's say, racism in America. They need to combat it. That's not the point here. What I'm
Right,
talking
right,
about
right.
is the way Israel is being lumped into this broader sort of framework. The next one will be peer pressure, which doesn't sound like anything should change because peer pressure has always existed. And peer pressure is an unbelievably strong force for teens, right? It's one of the strongest forces in terms of them coming to opinions or what they do or how they act or how they dress or how they behave. It's their peers. To the extent that, there are these amazing studies on peer pressure, it actually like can change what you're seeing, right? Like you can be told that something is red that is green and told that enough, and you're going to see red. Now, peer pressure hasn't changed. That's just in our brains. But what has changed is the peer group, meaning among a significant segment of American Jews, their affiliation with and their connection with the Jewish community has lessened. That has to do with weakening ties to synagogues. That has to do with increased assimilation. That has to do with a lot of factors. So that means that the peer group has broadened. It also means that the peer group, and this is an interesting thing that I'm seeing, right? It used to be that Palestinian spokesmen were like, first generation in America. Like you'd hear it, you'd see it. It was sort of like a foreign element, it almost seemed like. Whereas now they're just second, third generation, like our kids, of American kids who are expressing their pain and their anger, and they're part of the peer group. So as the peer group broadens and as the peer group's position shifts to pro-Palestinian, American Jews are basically almost, I don't want to say forced, but it's incredibly hard to fight that pressure. And that peer group is moving for all kinds of reasons, as we said. One is the shift in how Israel is perceived. The second is this whole idea of intersectionality. Another one is social media generally. Now, everyone likes to blame social media for everything. And social media, I think, is to blame for a lot of things. It's a big experiment, and our kids are the subjects. But when it comes to issues where nuance is the key, where a little bit of a deep dive is important, social media can be poison because it plays on everything, right? It plays on the peer pressure because your friends are all posting the same sort of thing. It plays on this sort of binary idea that you're either with me or you're against me. And I'll just go through some of the things that I listed, and there's more to it, right? It's a numbers game. There are billions of Muslims in the world. There are much more social media posts that they are putting up than Jews and Jewish supporters and supporters of Israel. Meaning, if you were to divide the world into pro-Palestine or pro-Israel, the numbers would be scary, right? All of that is in the mix. There's certainly a lack of nuance, meaning, as opposed to when I was a kid, if I wanted to learn something, I might go read about it. Right here, you're learning about a topic based on a very short clip, a slide, a celebrity telling you something, an influencer telling you their position on it, based sometimes on nothing.
How do you stop that?
We're going to get to some of that, but keep your question. I don't have all the answers, but it's a broader question beyond Israel, meaning
Right.
Basically opinions are very shallow if you're not diving deep into them generally, right? That's not the path to actually thinking deeply about something. And I don't think there's any easier answer for that. I would keep phones away from kids as long as possible, but
Yeah, I mean,
I'm a hypocrite.
no, I just find that So for my son Max was one of the people in fall at AMHSI. He is a major Zionist. And I'm not really sure. I mean, I was a student at AMHSI and I believe in Israel and love Israel, but his Zionism runs much deeper than my parenting. And I don't know where that came from, but he can go out on social media or hear something in a post and he's, launching it everywhere. And it's hard to sort of keep up with just all the social media things that hit them and what they're actually getting their information and how to validate what they're saying or reading or hearing, or even seeing counter arguments to things.
Right.
Yeah, it's incredibly hard. And I am going to talk about that a little bit later, of a way it's not always easy, right? The thing about kids is they don't necessarily want to hear what the previous generation has to say. And they're very firm in their opinions, even though those opinions may shift over the course of a lifetime significantly. Like, we know that, meaning I don't believe the same things I believed when I was 16 about everything. But they don't think in those terms, meaning teens are pretty much in many ways self-centered and are often like pulling away from their parents. And that doesn't help with this, right? Meaning if you go to a college campus and you're basically being told by everyone around you, all your peers, how you're supposed to think about something, and you buy into it, right? You buy into all kinds of theories and ideas. And one of those is going to be also, you know what, Israel is the aggressor, Israel is an apartheid state, Israel, on and on. It is unbelievably hard to say, well, on this one issue, I'm gonna listen to my grandma. I'm gonna care that my mom cares a lot about this. And it has to be deeper. Otherwise it's lost. It's very visual also, like, right, social media. Now, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but they're not necessarily true words, right? Like, context is everything when it comes to a picture. A picture is amazing, but like, what are you seeing? What does it mean? Where do you put it in history? Finally, we're at a real disadvantage with kids when it comes to just something as simple as, I put this as the marketability of pro-Palestinian positions. When it comes to Israel, it takes a beat. It takes a little bit to actually explain the history, to explain the millennia-long connection, to explain our return after 2,000 years of wanting to be there, to explain how we got the land, how the Palestinians left their land, on and on and on and on. On the other hand, if you take just this conflict, if you're pro-peace right now, pro-peace, like you want this war to stop today, you're basically anti-Israel, right? And that doesn't ring true to people. If you're pro-ceasefire, who wouldn't want to stop babies from dying? Like 12,000 Palestinians have died. Who wouldn't want to stop that destruction of humanity? How could you be against that? How could you be pro-apartheid if everyone's telling you Israel's an apartheid state without having a full understanding of what an apartheid state is and how Israel's not an apartheid state, right? These things are like amazing marketing slogans. Genocide, who would want to be for genocide? We of all people, right? The leftist, I mean, the Jewish organizations that we all see taking over, Grand Central Station and the Capitol, they are playing off this quite a bit, right? They'll say they have slogans like "Never again" applies to everyone, right? Like we're not going to be complicit in a genocide. We're not going to be standing by in a genocide. We of all people, the Jews, should know that, right? I've read interviews with young American anti-Zionists who say my grandparents, my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, my great-grandparents were Holocaust survivors. How could I be in favor of what's happening here? Meaning, obviously, if you take a step back, their grandparents 99 out of 100 times would be shocked and appalled that their kids are anti-Israel, or that their grandkids are. Displacement, right? It sounds easy, right? These people were here, you took their place. What are you doing that for? Colonialism. Nobody wants to be part of a colonial enterprise. And then disproportionality, right? It's when you're online and you're like consuming social media and you're seeing the destruction of families, babies dying, old women dying, on and on and on every day. And then you look at on the Israeli side, well, there's only whatever it is, I don't know, 1,200, 1,300 casualties. Well, you must be doing something wrong. Okay, so that's what I had. Do you guys want to add anything? Is there any other reasons you think why young, now this is a broad statement, right, Lainey, but why there is more anti-Israel sentiment among young American Jews than older American Jews? Yes, Jennifer.
Well, I teach seventh grade Hebrew school, and the kids really don't have that strong a connection to Israel. Like we did, the rabbi did like a crash course in Israeli history when this whole thing went down, and the kids really didn't have a firm grasp of Israeli history and the Palestinian Israeli conflict at all. Like they really didn't. And part of that is that they haven't been in Hebrew school because of the pandemic. The kids are barely back at Hebrew school, right? Congregational levels are really low in terms of attendance, and they're consuming social media like nonstop. My seventh grade kids have like full access all the time to their phones. And that wouldn't be my choice. That wasn't my choice as a parent. But as a teacher, like these kids are on their phones all night long. And they're just consuming so much that it's really hard to compete with. It's hard to compete with them at all, because it's just, 3-5 second videos constantly about what's going on. And it's difficult. There hasn't been youth groups. There hasn't been things going on that would really connect kids to Israel.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say like our son has been in Jewish day school like since kindergarten, and the high school's been better now, but like K-8, I really don't feel like he has a strong connection to Israel. It wasn't until the pandemic when he went to BBYO, which was super pro-Israel, which I was very happy about. Like in my house, like you just, you can't talk about anti-Israel. Like it just doesn't happen. And so, but I'm actually quite disappointed in some of the Jewish day schools too, at least in Chicago where we live.
Yeah.
See,
Okay. Yeah.
I think I mean, my son might be more unique. I think he likes to be a little bit of a provocative in what he says. And so I think I think some of these kids gravitate to the conflict to try to understand and be provocative and have conversation. But sometimes the surface level knowledge isn't all there, or the connection between history and now isn't all there. So like they've studied the history and and they have a connection within them either to Judaism or to Israel. And they know this gobbledygook is happening on the news, and they're getting 10-second or 3-second snippets on whatever social media app, and then they're trying to build context behind it. And I don't think they usually are always grounded in what's happening in their launching of information, both the teens and even the other information that's out there. It's just this gobbledygook of nonsense in many respects, or not founded in anything.
I think that's absolutely true. All true. I think there's also the added element now of potentially students who, fearing an anti-Semitic backlash, are going to just join the other side of it, right? Like beyond the peer pressure aspect of it. And I'm not there. Like I don't know the extent of the way kids are feeling anti-Semitism or not. But that fear element can also push you potentially to just run away from this identity. As can, of course, as we said, like regular teenagerdom, right? Like you want to be oppositional to your parents sometimes, and the thing that they hold dearest is sometimes the thing that you are going to at least, say something very provocative about. That can happen.
But Benji, I think also to your point about a couple slides back, the intersectionality, at least, I don't know, my husband and I talk about this a lot, and he always uses that word. He thinks like that is a huge part of this for some of these kids, like who are into all the social justice, where, they want to be a part, but then you have to like denounce your, love for Israel or any connection to Israel.
I think it does play a really big part. And it's, as we know, meaning like you can't, Israel doesn't fit into the box of take white, right? Meaning most Israelis are from the Middle East. It doesn't even work, like even on a very simple like level. But even if you
nobody
want
wants
to
to hear that. I mean, like nobody like will pay attention to that. Like I know exactly. It's
right. It's true. All right, so let's work through a little bit now, like how you can talk to a teen who's questioning or has already decided that they are not supportive of Israel. And by the way, meaning one of the biggest indicators or determinants for a kid being supportive of Israel really is coming to Israel. And your kids have done that. So that's like a big check mark right there already, because that in itself personalizes it. One I would say is to personalize your own Israel connections, meaning people shouldn't assume that their kids understand really why they, the parents or the teachers, whatever it is, love Israel, or why they are supporting Israel, even if they don't necessarily support policies in Israel or every aspect of, the religion and state in Israel, or policies toward Palestinians, whatever it is, why there is that deep connection. And to get there on some level, you have to move past this idea that we're all the same. You have to accept the fact that you're part of a broader community, and that community has to be important to you, right? Meaning your community is, you're part of the Jewish community. You're part of other communities too, but you're also part of the Jewish community, and that's a big part of your life. Now, I said tribalism versus community, because tribalism is like a dirty word. Like you don't want to say I'm different than you, I'm more special than you, whatever it might be. But community, that sense of we're a part of something bigger than us, and it's important to us, like beyond everything else, it's important to us because I am a Jew, and why that is something that I think is important to express to a teen who's questioning. The other is personal history, meaning we as educators, as parents, we kind of like, and this is true for me too, we kind of think that history is just going to be transmitted because people are our children or our students, and it's kind of going to just happen without it being intentional. And then often, like, I'll find out, like, I love history, I've taught Jewish history, and then I'll remember my kids don't know our own family history. Like, I just didn't do it, and that's almost like a crime, right? Because all of that plays into it here, meaning an understanding not only of Jewish history, where there was this yearning to return to Israel, a love of Zion, incredible persecution throughout the exile and throughout the diaspora that led to the need for the Jewish state. The personal history also would hit home for a person much more even than a sense of communal history or communal responsibility to our one homeland. So I would say explaining your practical attachment, explaining your personal attachment, and explaining your emotional attachment to Israel, meaning that sort of is a starting point for getting somewhere with a teenager. The other is to basically say, you know what, social media exists, it's very surface, it's very binary, it's very polarized, but we need to go into the nuances. Not everything is perfect on my side of the argument. Let's go there. Let's go with what you're saying, that let's say you heard somewhere at some rally that Israel committed massacres in 1948, 1949, right? Like, let's do it. Let's go there and let's discuss the fact that maybe Israel hasn't always been as interested as it should be in the peace process. Right now this requires like our own knowledge, of course, right? But that's not that hard to do, right? You can really spend the time if it's important enough to you. I'm not saying you, to a person, like in terms of trying to get yourself up to speed on being able to have these conversations, not arguments. But yeah, of course, Israel makes mistakes. Of course, the Palestinians have a narrative and have grievances and have real grievances. There's no question. Of course, you're not anti-Semitic if you criticize Israel. Of course, not everyone at a pro-Palestinian rally is necessarily anti-Semitic. Some are, and you can explain why. But using a broad brush, it's just giving a team back what they're giving you, which is slogans, right? Like if you hate Israel, you're anti-Semitic, right? Meaning the way to actually get a team to engage with in an issue is not to bring it down to a level of a shouting match. It's to actually get into the issues. To talk to them about what this war is about, right? There are many, many civilians on the Palestinian side, but this is not a war against Palestinians. This is a war against Hamas. This is a war that was started by Hamas. Hamas is an absolute evil. Now, I said not to talk in absolutes, but this one I'll take the liberty, okay? Getting there, getting it to be framed in those terms changes the equation already. Because it's very hard to defend Hamas. It's very hard to empathize with Hamas. And it's true, meaning Israel could have done what they're doing now at any point it wanted to. But nothing was done to us that could have put us over the edge where we felt like we needed to do this to put our soldiers in danger, our communities in danger, and Palestinian civilians in danger. Another topic, does Israel kill civilians? Yes, they do. Civilians die in war. And that brings a broader topic. I mean, if you think about it, young people today have not really experienced war. They haven't experienced even following a war or reading about war necessarily. They might have in history. But the war in Ukraine is very far away, right? Discuss the nature of war, right? The fact is that war is horrible. Israel hates fighting wars. Anyone who's human hates fighting wars. If you're a soldier and you like fighting, like that's a problem. I mean, my son's in the army right now. You know, he said to me, Dad, I said, how, you know, this was like a year in. I said, how's it going, you know, in the army? He's like, I like it, but I don't like the profession, meaning the miktsua. What he meant was, I don't like the idea of killing people. And that's what you want, I think. So, and when you talk about war, you're talking about something that they haven't understood. It's been understood in the past. It's understood in the past that in war, horrible things happen. In war, some soldiers will do things that are immoral, even in the most moral army in the world. But this is not a normal war, even in those terms. Hamas is a terrorist organization and also a ruling entity in the West Bank. And beyond that, they've built all their infrastructure under the most densely populated piece of land in the world, right? So this is like a double reason as to why this is going to be a terrible, terrible conflict in terms of the human toll. Getting into the issue of, yes, civilians die. And maybe, by the way, meaning, I don't know, every time Israel has dropped a bomb, have they been careful enough? Has that pilot been careful enough? Have they dropped the right ordnance? Meaning, was the bomb too large for the target? Were too many civilians killed? I couldn't answer that, but I know as general policy, you have absolutely no desire to kill civilians. It's just, even on a logical level, it's against all of our interests, beyond the moral level. Now, Laura, this is what you were talking about, and this is how to sort of get a little bit beyond this idea of getting all your news from social media and having that sway your opinion and your moral compass and your identity. And this is not easy, right? You're basically teaching teens to be smart consumers of information. And that means that when a teen comes to you and is expressing an opinion, you go through with them. Okay, like, where did you get that from? Like, where is that? Okay, where did they get that from? Right? Meaning the same way that, you know, in the very beginning, when I showed you that poll, right? The first thing you do is, well, when is that poll taken? And what's the sample size? And what's the organization that took it, right? These are things that are sort of the basics, right? Who is the author? Who's paying the author, right? All of this is critical. Let's say it's the United Nations. Well, let's look at the United Nations. Okay, that sounds amazing and that sounds like the ultimate source, but why does the United Nations only condemn Israel? Multiples of hundreds of times more than any other country, right? So that process of becoming a smart consumer of information, trying to get to whether this information is valid and whether this information is something that can be relied upon, it's not easy at all, but it is something that I think is absolutely necessary if we're going to keep the next generation informed and involved. Okay, now this is not easy, and I think for many parents this is not easy, but that what I'm basically saying here is not to ignore inflammatory statements, even if you're offended by them. We all know that kids say things for effect. A kid might say, "I hate you, Dad," right? Or worse. Like, and in the moment, you could lose it, right? Whatever it might be. I don't believe in God. I don't this. Whatever it is that gets you upset, a teen could find the way to get there. But it's important for us, I think, that we not go there. It's important for us that we not be dismissive of what they're saying, to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're not coming from a bad place, but they're coming from just not understanding the issue, or not appreciating the issue, or not taking everything into account, right? So when a teen says Israel's racist, right? Well, okay, let's take that apart a little bit. Like, what does that mean? Israel's an apartheid state. Okay, that's what you're saying. Let's talk about what an apartheid state is. Let's talk about the Arab Israeli population in Israel that has absolute equal rights. Let's talk about the Arabs of East Jerusalem, which Israel annexed, which has they all have the right to take Israeli citizenship, and some do. And even those that don't have basically equal rights, right? Let's talk about the dangers to Israel in terms of giving all Palestinians in land which has never been annexed equal rights. So it's just something that you have to go deeper with. Israel's a terrorist state. Okay, what's a terrorist? What does a terrorist do? A terrorist tries to kill innocent civilians on purpose. Does Israel actually do that? When have they done that? Okay, maybe that happened once. Maybe, I don't even know about such a thing. Is that policy, right? And then this is the ultimate. Like, if you're involved in online debate at all, everyone will say, when you make a point, let's say on the issue of attacking Israel for a human rights record, if you were to say back to someone, well, what about Saudi Arabia? Nobody talks about them. What you're going to get back from a teenager or from someone in college is, that's just whataboutism. It's not a valid statement. It's not a valid argument. That's what you're going to get back. I would posit that term whataboutism is used way too broadly.
Can you define what that means? My kids might be too young for this. I haven't heard that yet.
Yeah, it's basically when someone makes an argument, and your answer is basically a deflection by bringing up a different issue. So if someone were to say Israel is disproportionately killing civilians in Gaza, and you were to say, well, what about when the Allies had to defeat Germany in World War II and had to kill 500,000 German civilians to do it? Not kill, they had to die. Right?
Got it. Okay.
So it's really saying the word "what about." But I would argue that you can't just take that as an answer in terms of not having a conversation, because it's so broad. It takes out of your sort of arsenal the ability to compare and contrast situations. Like, it's almost impossible to talk about something in a vacuum, to talk about something without context. Like, actually, that example of Germany is real, right? Meaning it's an absolutely just cause to defeat Nazi Germany. In defeating Nazi Germany, hundreds of thousands of German civilians were killed, right? In the defeat of Imperial Japan, hundreds of thousands of... Now, you can question whether it needed to be that high or not, like whether the bombing of Dresden have to happen, whether Hiroshima and Nagasaki have to happen. I'm not going there, but I'm just saying that's the nature of war. You can look at situations, if someone were to say, well, Israel's on stolen land, right? If you were to respond back, well, everyone's on stolen land. What does that mean? First of all, Israel's not. Like, okay, but even if I would accept that argument, the United States was taken from the Indians, right? Like, which place wasn't taken from someone? It doesn't exist. Nobody's where they were originally. The French were not like, I mean, I could give you a lot of examples, but that's not the way the world works. There's a lot of migration, a lot of warfare that happens for people to get where they are in the end. And it's not, there are, I'll give you another great example on the issue of the return of refugees. So after World War II, there were millions of, let's say, you could start with German civilians in what later became Poland had to leave their homes and move back to Germany. Same thing that happened in the Czech Republic, right? Germans had to leave there. It happened all over the place, right? You look at something like Pakistan, India, massive movements of people, right? Displaced. Nobody talks about them going home. Nobody. So meaning if you're going to talk about Israel and you want standards by which to judge Israel, it has to be the standard of what happens in the rest of the world. Israel can't be held to its own standard and survive. Like we hold ourselves to a very high standard, but you can't hold an entire country to that about every issue, right?
I think this is really personal, but I have always held Israel to a higher standard and been proud of that standard that Israel has always kept to. So I don't know. It's like a pride I have internally for me with Israel. I think you guys do. Israel does hold their selves to a higher standard. I love that about Israel.
So I think we do, but I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that in terms of, let's say, the way.
No, I'm just saying in general, it was a positive.
Yeah, I didn't mean that in the way Israel function. I'm just talking about the sort of mechanical ways.
Yeah.
That things have to happen. It's the way of the world. It's universal, actually, right? That when a victor wins a war, right? Certain things happen. When you fight, people are going to unfortunately die, right? So like, we do hold ourselves to our standard, and the IDF, I believe, really is the most moral army in the world. Like, I see it. I know. I mean, all my friends' kids are in it, and they're fantastic, like fantastic kids. And there's many other ways in which Israel is, but in terms of almost saying that Israel needs to fly in the face or be the antithesis of human nature, or of complete, antithesis of geopolitical relations, Israel has to act like, that's already, I think, a step too far. Like, no country could do that.
No, it's fair. I'd like you to take over the overall news segments that are happening over here in the US.
My pleasure. Finally, I would say this. We all know this, like, respect trumps condescension, right? We know that these teenagers and these young people are usually not coming from a bad place, right? And I would say that this is true in any argument, and it's not always easy, but just like, I think respect goes a long way, even when someone disagrees with you, and even when it hurts you, as it hurts me to see these rallies in America, even when it hurts you, like, to keep up that respect, it gets everyone so much further. Like, we're still part of the same community. Now, that gets me really to the last point. And that is that I think it's critical that they understand, and that they understand that we understand, that we share the same universal and Jewish values, right? We're coming at this issue differently, and we disagree with them, but we believe in human rights. We believe in equality. We believe in that a nation and a people should be allowed to defend themselves. We believe in the shared humanity of everybody. We believe that it's an absolute tragedy when Palestinians are killed, right? Starting from there in itself, like, just going there suddenly changes the tone of the conversation, right? You're no longer a villain. You're no longer a monster, right? You're their teacher. You're their dad. You're the person who happens to be talking to them on the subway or whatever it is. And you both care. You're just coming at this from different places. You both believe you're right. And there's what to talk about. And why is this so important? This is the last bit. And then we have 5 minutes. I want to hear what else you guys got to say. I believe this is an existential issue for the state of Israel. And I don't think it takes too much to understand why. Israel cannot survive without the United States, period. No country can survive without a superpower supporting it. Israel would not survive 3 weeks in this war without the aid that's coming in right now from the States. In the United Nations, if the US isn't there to veto resolutions against us, we turn into a pariah state, something like South Africa did. And the trend is troubling, because if these trends continue and the next generation comes to power, and the people on the elite campuses right now are the ones who are going to occupy the halls of power in 10 years, Israel's in trouble. So I don't view this as like just an interesting thing about the US population and young people. I view this as like mission critical for the future of Israel. Israel's not going to find a friend like America, and they're definitely not going to find them because every other country is more anti-Israel than America by far. In America, there's still broad support for Israel. But if we lose the youth, then we've lost America, basically. Not to end on a sort of like downer, but I want this to be like just a call to arms a little bit. Like there's a lot of work to do. We do a lot of it here. And thank you guys for sending your kids, right? Like the idea of Alexander Muss High School is that not that you're taking one person and helping them understand their Jewish identity and their Jewish peoplehood and their connection to Israel, and that's that one person, but you're going so deep with them. You're spending 4 months or 8 weeks or whatever it is, fully immersed in it, that you're basically building a thought leader, someone who can have these conversations, someone who can make a difference in terms of the way it is to be an American Jew, in terms of Jews' relationship with Israel and love for Israel down the road.